Rapture becomes her. Chapter 15. Despite her protest, dragging her willy-nilly behind him, Barnaby charged into the library where his cousins were gathered and announced cheerfully, "It's official. Emily has agreed to marry me." Leaving his cousins to stare open-mouthed, Barnaby whisked Emily away and went in search of Cornelia. Contrary to what she had said, Cornelia had not retired to take a nap. She was seated in a cozy room that overlooked a small garden, sipping tea and pretending to read from the novel she had brought with her from the Birches. The instant the door opened, Barnaby, with Emily in tow, strode into the room. She dropped the book and looked up expectantly. Grinning, Barnaby brought Emily to his side and said, "It was a near thing, but she said yes." Joy blazed across her great-aunt's face and stilled some of the turmoil in Emily's breast. Her hazel eyes bright with tears, Cornelia cried, "Oh, my dears, I cannot tell you how delighted I am." Emily left Barnaby's side and sat down beside her. She searched Cornelia's face. "You are truly happy about this? And we have your blessing?" Cornelia patted her on the cheek. "Indeed I am, and of course you have my blessing," she smiled. "From the moment I laid eyes on young Jocelyn, I hoped that this would happen. I will admit, however, that I wasn't certain of the outcome. I feared you'd place all of us, me and Mrs. Gilbert, Jeb, and the others, ahead of your own chance for happiness." "I almost did," Emily admitted, looking troubled. "Then it's a very good thing, isn't it," Barnaby said, "that your wise aunt told me all about your hobby?" Emily flashed him a hostile glance. "It is hardly a hobby," she shot back. Barnaby threw up his hands. "Wrong choice of words, but it is hardly a pastime suitable for my Viscountess." Her eyes narrowed, and he added hastily, "I don't intend for you to abandon Mrs. Gilbert and the others, only that we will find another way to help them, something less likely to land us all in their gall." "Jeb sailed for Calais last night," Emily confessed. "I can hardly call him back." Barnaby nodded. "I know that your entanglement cannot be ended overnight." A sparkle lit his eyes. "I may have to try my hand at smuggling a time or two, before we are all safely away and everyone is secure. Running contraband goods ashore should prove quite an adventure." Emily was aghast. Rising to her feet, she crossed the stand in front of him. Her hand resting on his arm, her eyes on his, she said urgently, "No, you dare not. What if you were caught? Think of the scandal. The Viscount Jocelyn, a common criminal." Barnaby looked offended. "Now, I resent that. I'm sure I'd make an exceptional criminal." Cornelia snorted with laughter. "Indeed you would, my lord. Quite exceptional." "Don't tease," Emily begged, looking from one to the other. "My involvement is bad enough, and if I could have found—" She stopped, made a face. "I'll just have to think of a way to disperse the group in a manner that doesn't count them hardships." Barnaby's hand closed warmly over hers where it lay on his arm. Smiling at her, he said, "We'll find a way. You're not in this alone anymore, sweetheart." Emily looked doubtful, and Barnaby's brow rose. "I think," he said in lofty tones, at variance with the amusement glittering in his eyes, "that you forget that you now have called on the purse of a rich man. A very rich man, according to my cousins. But Jeb and the others, they won't want charity," Emily objected. "Do you know," Barnaby said, bored with the topic, "right now I don't give a darn what they want. We'll find a resolution. But may we please forget about them and simply enjoy our engagement? Guilt smoked Emily. He could have offered for eligible young ladies with more beauty and fortune than she possessed, and yet for reasons that escaped her, he wanted to marry her. And what did she do? She fussed about a ragtag band of smugglers. A rueful smile on her lips, she said, "You're right, of course, and I apologize." Apology accepted, he glanced from Emily to Cornelia. "So how can we arrange the wedding?" A spirited discussion followed. Barnaby was all for riding to London and obtaining a special license and marrying Emily by the beginning of the next week. Emily was adamantly opposed, and even Cornelia was hesitant. Frowning, Cornelia glanced at Barnaby and said, "Your engagement to Emily is going to be a 9 days' wonder." Barnaby shrugged, and she went on. "You are an exceedingly eligible gentleman, and there's going to be a bevy of disappointed, envious young ladies and equally disappointed parents when your engagement to the daughter of a mere country squire is announced. There is no cause to add fuel to the gossip by a too hasty marriage." She grimaced. Marrying as soon as the banns are called will still cause speculation, but much less than a marriage obtained by special license and performed before anyone is aware that your interest is fixed on Emily. Feeling events were moving too fast for her, Emily asked, "Wouldn't it be better if we waited until spring or early summer to marry? Perhaps June?" "No," Barnaby said flatly. "I want you out of that house and away from your contemptible cousin just as soon as it can be arranged." "I am out of that house and away from him," Emily snapped. Barnaby sighed. "And we both know that your visit here is going to create a great deal of talk, especially if it goes on for too long. We can brush by for a few nights," explaining that. He looked at Cornelia and grinned. "Out of deference to your great-aunt's age, it was decided that it will be less taxing on her if during this exciting time you both stayed here for a night or two." "Now that's an excellent explanation," Cornelia said, nodding, "and one likely to believe without question." When Emily continued to argue for a summer wedding, Barnaby said, "If there is a long delay before we wed, you cannot remain here, even with Cornelia as chaperone. For you to live here for weeks, months on end would raise all sorts of eyebrows. People will wonder about Geoffrey and be curious about why you aren't remaining in the home you have lived in all your life, a home that is only a few miles away from here." "He's right," Cornelia admitted reluctantly. "And don't forget, no matter how this plays out or what story Geoffrey concocts to explain it, there is going to be a devilish uproar over Answorth's death. I can't abide my great-nephew, but for your sake, for the sake of the family name, I don't want him exposed for the despicable scoundrel he is. If we remain here, there is bound to be talk." She looked grim. "Some of that talk will not be kind, and some of those disappointed young ladies and their parents won't be above spreading spiteful gossip and innuendo." Their arguments held weight, and Emily gave in. "The banns it will be," she finally agreed with an unflattering lack of enthusiasm. "Good," said Cornelia, looking at Barnaby. She ordered, "You can ride over to the vicar's today and tell him. The first calling of the banns can take place this Sunday, and we can plan the wedding for the second week of February." Thoughtfully, Cornelia murmured, "I must write Anne and appraise her of events. Naturally, she and Hugh and his mother will attend the wedding, and there will be time enough for us to order gowns from London." She smiled at Barnaby, her eyes dancing. "You'll have to stand the nonsense, I'm afraid. Can't have your bride and her family appearing in rags. Once the banns are called, you should host at least one party, perhaps even a ball, and invite the neighbors, such as Lord and Lady Broadfoot, Sir Michael and Mrs. Featherstone and her bride. Oh, and naturally the vicar and his family. It's a good thing Matthew and his brothers are already here. They'll help even out the number, she grinned wickedly. Your cousins can provide a nice consolation prize for those girls of Mrs. Featherstone's and Broadfoot's trio of daughters. Upon further discussion, it was agreed that Emily and Cornelia would remain at Windmill one more night. Tomorrow morning will be soon enough for us to return to the Birches, Cornelia decided. Tapping her fingers to her lips, she said, You know, after you've talked to the vicar this morning, it might be wise if you invite him to dinner tonight. Penelope Smart is as kind a woman as you'll ever meet, and despite having 3 daughters of her own to launch, she won't begrudge Emily's good fortune. With Penelope on our side, she'll be able to help smooth over any awkwardness. Cornelia's eyes twinkled. And Christian lady though she is, she'll enjoy being the only lady of the neighborhood, besides ourselves, to meet you. It'll be a feather in her cap. Amused, Barnaby said, Since I have my marching orders, I shall leave you ladies for a few hours. If you need anything, ring for Peckham. The small, hastily arranged dinner party that night went off very well. Matthew, despite his privately expressed disapproval of the engagement, closed ranks behind his American cousin and gave every appearance of a man well pleased with Barnaby's choice of a bride-to-be. Not surprising, Thomas copied his older brother's manner. Simon exuded nothing but goodwill and delight to everyone. At the appointed time, the vicar and Mrs. Smythe arrived at Windmere with their 3 daughters and eldest son in tow. Since Mrs. Smythe was genuinely fond of Emily and Cornelia and had never given a serious thought to one of her daughters snailing the Viscount, after her initial astonishment, she was, as Cornelia predicted, thrilled to meet the Viscount and congratulate the newly engaged people. After dinner, they all gathered in the grand gold and bronze salon. The Smart girls, their brother and the Jocelyn cousins, were laughing, and talking a short distance away, Barnaby, Emily, and the vicar appeared to be deep in a private conversation in one of the alcoves created by a pair of bay windows that overlooked the front of the house. Her eyes on the trio in the alcove, Mrs. Smythe remarked to Cornelia, They make a very handsome couple. Giving Cornelia an arch look, she murmured, I suppose it goes without saying that you are very pleased with the match. Cornelia nodded. I cannot deny it. She looked meaningfully at Penelope. But you know, when the word spreads of the engagement, that there is going to be a great deal of gossip. The vicar's wife of nearly 3 decades was a tall, slender redhead who wore her 48 years well, despite the birth of 6 children before she was 25. Even in her youth, she had been only passably pretty, but she had kind brown eyes, a sprinkling of freckles across her nose, that imparted a genuine charm and a vivacious smile. Seldom ruffled, Penelope Smythe adored gossip, was seldom unkind, and could be counted on to keep a cool head in the midst of a crisis. Cornelia was very fond of her, and, in spite of the gap in their ages, counted on her as one of her dearest friends. Penelope considered Cornelia's comment and agreed. Yes, there's no pretending that there won't be a firestorm of gossip. Her gaze affectionate, she added, You know the vicar, and I will do our best to help quell the worst of it. Your Emily is a darling, and I couldn't be happier for her. But there will be others who will suffer great heart-burnings at her good fortune. She frowned. If only there was a way that I could help diffuse the worst of the dismay that certain ladies are bound to feel when they learn that the most eligible gentleman in the neighborhood is no longer available. She considered the situation a moment longer, and then an impish smile crossed her face. I think I shall call upon Mrs. Featherstone tomorrow, and perhaps Lady Broadfoot. After all, one might say, as the vicar's wife, that it is my duty to apprise them of this exciting occurrence. Much better for them to learn of the engagement from me than to hear of it out of the blue on Sunday. Cornelia nodded her approval, and Penelope went on. Naturally, I shall let them know how much the vicar and I approve of the match, and remind them what a dear, charming young lady Emily is, and how often they have expressed their fondness for her. Her eyes twinkled. What else can they be but happy for her good fortune? Cornelia laughed. I wonder if the vicar knows what a clever little minx he married. I think he suspects Penelope, admitted, smiling, but I am very careful not to be too clever. The two ladies were seated on one of the sofas near the fire, that crackled on the hearth of the huge marble fireplace, and in perfect harmony they sipped their tea, both of them satisfied with their plan. Mrs. Smythe had put forth, setting down her cup and looking toward the alcove where the vicar, Barnaby, and Emily were still standing. Mrs. Smythe said, after Matthew's unflattering description, I must say that Lord Jocelyn is not at all what I expected. Tartly, Cornelia replied, I'm sure that Matthew led you to expect a wild-haired barbarian wearing furs who eats raw meat with his fingers and wipes his nose on his sleeve. Penelope smothered her laugh. Something like that. Her expression serious once more, she added, it was not very nice of Matthew, but one can hardly blame him for feeling rather hard done by. He'd been groomed for the title since he was a child. Cornelia fixed a pensive gaze on Matthew, where he stood at the edge of the group of younger people. He looked animated enough, she thought, as he smiled at something. Esther, the eldest of the Smythe daughters, said, watching him closely, though, she detected just the faintest air of unhappiness around him. Something in his forced gaiety and the resentment she had noted in him sometimes when he was around Barnaby, and thought himself undeserved, told her that Matthew had not fully accepted his fall from grace. She didn't blame him. Only a saint would have accepted with equanimity the kind of loss Matthew had suffered. Penelope echoed Cornelia's thoughts. I had to give Matthew credit, though, for being here tonight. To be treated as a mere guest by the man who had taken away everything he had grown up, believing would be his one day, can't be easy for him. Barnaby laughed at something the vicar said, and Penelope's gaze slid to him. Particularly not easy when Lord Jocelyn had such a winning way about him, she said. Her head tipped to one side. She studied Barnaby for a moment and added, one cannot say that he is precisely handsome, but with those rugged features and broad shoulders, there is no denying that he has great appeal for the feminine sex. Penelope sighed dreamily. No wonder Emily agreed to marry him so quickly. Resisting all that dark vitality would be near impossible. I agree, Cornelia murmured, a decidedly impure gleam dancing in her hazel eyes. His great-grandfather was the same, and resisting him didn't cross my mind. It wasn't very late when the party broke up, and the guests departed. Emily and Cornelia did not linger long downstairs once the Smythes had driven away, and well before midnight, Emily was tucked up in her bedroom. A candle flickered on the stand near her bed, and finding sleep elusive, Emily studied the intrinsic pattern of the silk canopy overhead. Throughout the day she had no private moment, no time to think about what she had done, but now alone for the first time she grappled with the enormous changes that were going to take place in her life. Good God, she had agreed to marry Viscount Jocelyn. She wasn't completely certain of the state of her heart, but she couldn't pretend that she didn't find things fascinating, nor that she didn't find his company most exhilarating when he wasn't being deliberately ignoring his wealth and title. Jocelyn appealed to her in a way no other man ever had, and there was no denying that he aroused the most delicious and exciting sensations within her when he took her into his arms. But just a while she lost herself in the memory of that demanding mouth on hers and the strength of those powerful arms as they had crushed her next to him. To her embarrassed astonishment, her nipples peaked and shuddery warmth cascaded through her body. Her cheeks flaming, she buried her face in one of the pillows. He bewitched me. She decided not very happily, and like a feeble-minded twit, I melted into his arms with nary a thought about anything but the wonder of his kiss. She snorted. Out of party was that's what she was. She rolled onto her back and stared again at the canopy, as if the answer to her feelings and emotions were hidden in a complicated pattern woven in silk. Was she regretting her acceptance of his proposal? Not exactly, but their courtship, if one could call it that, certainly had not followed in a traditional path. A month ago, Lord Johnson had been an utter stranger, nothing more than a name to her, and yet now, a scant 3 weeks after that fateful meeting in the best bedroom of the Crown, she had agreed to marry him. He swept me off my feet, she acknowledged. There was much to admire about Lord Johnson, and he had proven himself to be an honorable man, a man who could be trusted, and don't forget, she thought with a wise smile, Cornelia approves of him. Remembering the sight of him as he had burst into the room where Answorth held her captive, her heart swelled. He had looked like an avenging god, those black eyes blazing and their gleaming knife held in one hand. He had come to her aid at the time she had needed him most. He was many things, fascinating, trustworthy, charming, wealthy, kind to old ladies, she reminded herself, smiling. Don't forget that. And she suspected that she might very well be. If not in love with him, certainly fallen in love with him. Of course she had agreed to marry him. Emily frowned. Her reasons for accepting him were obvious, but why did he want to marry her? She had no fortune. She had no great noble or titled family. Quite the opposite, thinking of her cousin Geoffrey. She wasn't a notable beauty or a scintillating wit, she sighed. There was nothing about her that she could see that would attract a man like Lord Johnson. Her lips drooped. But if she couldn't name a reason why he would want to marry her, she could think of one very good reason why marriage to her would be anathema to a man like Jocelyn, a smuggler. Yet incredibly, he had asked her to marry him. She sat up, hugging her knees to her chest. Indeed, he had seen. She admitted, puzzled but pleased, determined to marry him. Who knew what he was thinking? She shook her head. It was all too complicated, and she gave up trying to understand Jocelyn's reasons and snuggled under the covers. A wistful smile curved her lips. Was it possible, she wondered, that he was as fascinated by her as she was by him? All in all, as he lay in his bed, much later that evening, Barnaby was satisfied with the events of the day. Emily had agreed to marry him, and tonight's dinner party had gone well. He liked the vicar and his wife, and thought the daughters and son reflected laudably on their parents. A brief word with Cornelia before she had departed for her rooms imparted the welcome information that Mr. Smythe would be cheerfully spreading the news of the engagement tomorrow. He smiled in the darkness, and of course from Lamb he knew that the servant Grapevine was already hard at work. By this time tomorrow night, he doubted there'd be anyone from high or low consequence in the area that wouldn't know that Lord Johnson was to marry Miss Emily Townsend in early February. For a second, Barnaby spared a thought for his younger sister Bethany, an ocean away. She liked Emily, he decided, and with the wedding soon to take place, He wished not for the first time that he had not given in to Bethany's pleadings and allowed her to remain in Virginia with their mother's brother and his wife as chaperones. His lips twitched. There was a great deal about his sister and his wife-to-be that was similar. They were a pair of stubborn, spirited wenches, and he said that he was as malleable as butter in his small, determined hands. His smile faded as he considered the ominous clouds still on his horizon. Someone had tried to kill him, not once but twice, and an unknown attacker or attackers remained at large. He rubbed the healing wound hidden beneath his thick black hair. The argument could be made that this latest attempt had been an accidental shooting by a poacher, but he dismissed that idea out of hand. He didn't believe in coincidences, and for him to have escaped death 2 times in less than a month beggared belief. It would have been confronting to think that whoever had tried to kill him would give up and accept defeat after 2 failures, but Barnaby doubted it. It was possible, he conceded, that the attacks on his life had nothing to do with his inheritance, but it was difficult to come up with another compelling reason for someone to want him dead. He couldn't claim to be beloved by everyone he met, but neither could he come up with any reason other than the jostling fortune that would drive someone to want to murder him, which left a very short list of suspects: Matthew, Thomas, Simon, and Darius Ways. They all stood to gain by his death. Matthew would inherit everything that he had always believed would be his. Thomas would become the heir apparent, and while Barnaby admitted it was a weak reason for murder, it wasn't to be dismissed. What was one more murder when a fortune was at stake? As for Simon, Barnaby scowled. What would Simon gain? He couldn't think of any advantage for Simon beyond being one step closer to inheriting the title, but it seemed a weak reason. Killing 3 people in order to inherit seemed a bit extreme, but if he was willing to accept that Thomas might kill 2 people, then for Simon to kill 3. The only thing Barnaby knew for certain was that someone wanted him dead. Thoughts of death turned his mind to his half-brother, Lucian. Emily's abduction yesterday had temporarily obliterated any serious contemplation of Lucian's fate. But with his own affairs well in hand, Barnaby finally had a moment to consider Luke's situation. With the turmoil and savagery boiling through France these days, he wondered, with no little anxiety, if Luke was even alive. Barnaby had warned his half-brother that this trip to France was folly, but Luke wouldn't listen to him on land, but had blindly sailed for the continent intent upon finding any surviving member of his mother's family. The news of the death of Louis XIV had shaken Barnaby. France was a country about to explode into even greater violence, and Luke was somewhere in the midst of the madness. Wearily, Barnaby ran a hand over his face, finally admitting that he had no choice but to go to France to try to find his half-brother. Tomorrow he would talk to Lamb about Luke, and thinking of Emily and his own happiness. Guilt clawed through him. How could he be happy knowing that Luke had need of him? How could he leave Emily behind at a time like this? But what choice did he have? He could no more ignore Luke's plight than he could have left Emily to answer evil designs. He took a deep breath, aware of what he must do. Just as soon as Jeb returned, he had to talk to him about sailing back to France. This time with a passenger Jeb would be leaving behind. Barnaby grimaced and admitted that Matthew might be inheriting this title sooner than anyone expected, particularly if he should lose his life in France while on what might be a fruitless quest to find and rescue as thankless a scamp as ever lived. His heart ached at the thought of leaving Emily, but he could not abandon Luke. Blast him! After tossing in the bed, he eventually gave up all pretense of sleep and wrapping a dark blue robe around his nakedness. wandered to the other end of the carvingist room. A pair of overstuffed chairs was a low mahogany table. Situated between them was arranged in front of the massive fireplace, and selecting one of the chairs, he sat down. A fire glowed on the hearth, staring at the shimmering orange and yellow coals. He tried to gain control of his unpleasant thoughts. To no avail. No sooner had he pushed aside painful images of Luke's lifeless body or Emily standing over his own grave than the memory of Answorth lying dead at his feet popped into his brain. He frowned, wondering how he could have handled the situation differently. Leaving Jeffrey alone with Answorth's body probably hadn't been the wisest thing that he ever done. But the need to get Emily away from there safely at Windman had been his paramount concern. With the luxury of hindsight, he was aware that the decision to thrust the disposal of Answorth's body into Jeffrey's hands could come back to haunt him. The probability that he'd be awoken tomorrow morning with the news that he was being arrested for Answorth's murder was low. But Barnaby didn't trust that spineless cousin of Emily's not to make a muck of everything. On the other hand, he reminded himself sourly, Geoffrey had a strong sense of self-preservation. Barnaby was still thinking about the Geoffrey and Answorth problem when he arose the next morning. As Lamb helped him struggle into a jacket of russet superfine, Barnaby said, "We should have heard something about Answorth before now. A death in the country, especially one under suspicious circumstances, should have raised comment." He glanced at Lamb. "You've heard nothing in the kitchen?" Lamb shook his head. "All anyone can talk about is your engagement. Everyone, except perhaps Peckham, is over the moon about your choice. Your Miss Emily is well thought of in the community, and most people are happy for her." He grinned. "You have risen in our opinion of your staff. They are of a mind that having the good sense to choose Miss Emily for your bride, that despite being an American, you're a right good fellow after all." Barnaby chuckled. "Well, one does try to keep the staff happy at all costs. And you?" Lamb asked, his blue eyes searching Barnaby's face. "Are you happy?" Barnaby patted him on the shoulder. "Yes, old man, I am happy." When Lamb just continued to stare at him, his brow raised, he asked, "Don't tell me you're in Matthew's camp and disapprove of my choice?" Lamb smiled. "No, if she is the bride of your choice, then I cannot wish you anything but happy." It wasn't quite the glowing acceptance Barnaby could have wished for, but it would do. He suspected that any reservations Lamb held had more to do with Geoffrey than with Emily, and reminded again of the Geoffrey and Answorth problem, he frowned. Almost as if he had read Barnaby's mind, Lamb said slowly, "I'm thinking it would behoove me to ride into the village and find out if there is any talk about Answorth or Geoffrey. As you say, something should have surfaced by now." He grimaced. "Unless Geoffrey Bruce Answorth's body alongside of that other fellow's, and is just going to pretend Answorth rode away without a word to anyone. Surely he's not that stupid." Geoffrey wasn't stupid at all, as they were to discover. With Barnaby's blessing, Lamb had ridden into the village to spend an hour or two at the Crown and to further his acquaintance with Mrs. Gilbert and perhaps one or two of her pretty daughters. There was, he told himself, as he tied his horse to the rail in front of the inn, no reason not to combine pleasure with business. Entering the main room that Saturday afternoon, he glanced around and was pleased to see that except for a pair of old fishermen seated at one of the tables and two of the Gilbert daughters behind a long counter, no one else was inside the inn. He barely seated himself in a quiet corner and had him served a tankard of ale by a smiling Flora, before Mrs. Gilbert appeared from the nether regions of the inn and joined him. Seating himself across from him, she said, "Terrible news about poor Mr. Answorth, isn't it?" In the act of sipping from his tankard of ale, Lamb set the tankard down on the table and asked cautiously, "And what news would that be?" "Why, only that it seems he and Squire and Bib too much while New Haven on Thursday and lost their way home. According to Squire, in the darkness and in a state of great ambition, he missed the road to the bushes." Seems they ended up near the cliffs of the Seven Sisters, and Mr. Answorth, needing to relieve himself, dismounted his horse in spite, a warning from Squire. Wandered too near the edge of the cliffs. Her voice bland, she continued. Unfortunate man fall over the cliffs and was swept out to sea. Village gossip has it that it was near 3 o'clock on Friday morning before Squire was able to make it to the constable's house and report the accident. Of course, a search was instituted, but Constable thinks that poor fellow was killed by the fall from the cliffs, and that there was nothing anyone could have done for him, even if they found him right away. She shuddered delicately. Anne's white body was discovered only this morning on a rocky stretch of beach not far away. They said the ravages of the sea and rocks was something terrible to see, or so I hear. Lamb's eyes met hers unflinchingly. Now, that's a magic tale, he said slowly, thinking that Geoffrey might be swine dung, but the man obviously thought on his feet. Considering the situation, Lamb decided that it worked very well, and also gave a plausible reason to explain why Emily's cousin hadn't been at Windmill last night. Lamb had assumed that the news of the engagement had already reached the village, but it appeared he was mistaken. He rubbed his jaw. It's a shame this had to happen at a most joyous time for Miss Emily. Mrs. Gilbert's eyes sharpened. What about Miss Emily? Leaning back, his eye, his eyes gleaming, he murmured, "Why, only that his lordship announced his engagement to Miss Emily last night at Windmere."